The cell reeked of sterilized metal and faint ozone, the kind of scent that clung to everything in the alien vessel. Cold restraints bit into Callan's wrists and ankles, pinning him to a table that gleamed under pale blue lights. His breathing was steady, though each inhale burned from fractured ribs. The voices around him were guttural and layered, belonging to the Klyth, tall, sinewed creatures with eyes like pools of molten amber. They had taken him 3 days ago, though the concept of time blurred in a place where light never shifted and agony came in intervals. He did not waste his strength thrashing against the restraints. He had tried once at the beginning when adrenaline still coursed through him. The bruises on his shoulders and the split in his lip were reminders that brute force would not free him. Now he conserved his energy, studied his captors, and waited. Pain was constant, sometimes sharp, sometimes dull, but never overwhelming enough to strip him of thought. That was their first mistake. A HFY scientist approached, its long digits manipulating a crystalline device that hummed with suppressed energy. Subject remains intact, it rasped in its layered voice, each tone overlapping with an echo. Commencing tolerance assessment. Callan's eyes followed the movement of the machine, but he didn't flinch. The scientist pressed the device to his forearm, and arcs of white fire spread through his nerves. His body stiffened, teeth grinding together, but he refused to scream. He let out a sharp exhale through his nose and forced his eyes to stay open, meeting the alien's unblinking stare. The HFY scribes clicked in dissonant notes, clearly puzzled. One muttered, other species vocalize immediately. Threshold exceeded. Continue, commanded a taller figure near the wall, its posture marked with authority. The arcs intensified, surging through Callan's arm and across his chest. He imagined the sensation as storm lightning coursing through wires. His vision whitened at the edges, but in his mind he saw his brother's face from years ago, laughing on a fishing dock. He clung to that memory, to the sound of water lapping at wood, and let the pain anchor him instead of breaking him. When the current stopped, he sagged against the restraints, sweat dripping down his temples. His breaths came quick, but his lips curled into something resembling a grin. "That all you've got?" he croaked, his voice raw but steady. The aliens exchanged uneasy glances. The commander stepped closer, towering over the restrained human. "You mock us while weakened. Your physiology is fragile. Your body will surrender soon enough." Callan spat blood onto the pristine floor, the red stark against silver metal. "Bodies break," he said hoarsely, "but breaking isn't the same as losing." The scientist adjusted settings, bringing forward another device. One shaped like a needle but humming with alien frequencies. It pressed the point into the tender space between Callan's ribs. A shriek of pain threatened to tear out of him, but he bit it back, forcing it into a guttural growl instead. His fists clenched against the restraints until nails cut into his palms. A chitter of confusion spread among the scribes. One gestured with trembling hands. Unusual, extreme resistance. The subject should be incapacitated. Yet he maintains coherence. The commander's amber eyes narrowed. Increased dosage. The needle plunged deeper, flooding him with searing heat that radiated outward. For a moment, blackness clawed at the edges of his vision, but he seized it and wrestled it down. Pain was an old companion, familiar and sharp, like the burn of frostbite during winters back on Earth, like the sting of broken bones when he fell from his bike as a child. He knew pain. He wore it like armor. When the device finally retracted, Callan was shaking uncontrollably, every muscle twitching in rebellion. He looked half dead, yet his voice rasped through cracked lips. "I need better toys." The scientist tilted its head, astonishment evident even in its alien features. "It is illogical. Response contradicts comparative data. Other species collapse before half this measure." The commander did not answer. It stared at Callan with something new, an emotion the human recognized as uncertainty. They unstrapped him briefly to roll him onto another table. His body nearly buckled, but he locked his knees and stood long enough to satisfy his own pride. When they shoved him down again, he whispered under his breath, barely audible, "Still standing." None of them understood the words, but the defiance in his tone carried meaning enough. The commander issued an order in clipped tones, and the chamber dimmed as machines recharged for a second trial. Callan closed his eyes, muscles trembling, but within himself he felt a stubborn fire. Every pulse of agony only reminded him he was still alive. And as long as he drew breath, he was not theirs to break. He listened to the shuffle of alien feet and the rising hum of power. Somewhere deep inside he allowed himself the smallest of smiles. Let them bring their worst. Pain was their weapon, but it was also his shield. The chamber filled with light and the next trial began. The chamber lights flared to full intensity, revealing Callan's battered form against the restraints. His skin bore mottled bruises and raw burns, his eyes red from sleeplessness, yet something in his gaze remained unbroken. The KLYH circled him with clinical precision, their voices a chorus of layered tones. To them this was still a matter of data, of thresholds and charts. To him it was war, even if his battlefield was only the narrow width of a steel table. The lead scientist extended a new device, a band forged from dark alloy, its surface glimmering with faint symbols. They fastened it around Callan's skull, and the air buzzed with static. He felt a cold needle of sensation pierce his thoughts, stabbing deeper than flesh could ever allow. It was not just pain, it was intrusion. They were inside his mind, clawing through memories, seeking weak points. Images flickered before him. His mother's voice singing in the kitchen, the shriek of artillery from his first combat tour, the smell of smoke in the forests where he once trained. He clenched his jaw, forcing the images to warp. Instead of surrendering, he filled his mind with noise, battle chants, fractured songs, the echo of laughter from men who had endured worse beside him. The alien probe pulsed harder, pressing against the walls of his consciousness until his vision blurred. But he resisted. When the scientist withdrew at last, it stumbled slightly, its hands trembling. "This is not natural," it hissed to the commander. His resistance to psychic strain exceeds projected variance. The commander's gaze swept over Callan's trembling frame. Perhaps his body is frail, but his mind? It left the sentence unfinished, yet the tone carried a weight of concern. Callan forced his cracked lips into a crooked grin. "What's wrong? Didn't like what you found in there?" The scientist recoiled as if the human had spoken venom. The restraint table shifted, lowering him into a new apparatus. This time heat radiated through the air, searing against his skin before the true trial even began. Flames danced within a chamber of transparent alloy, licking close enough to blister flesh. The heat wrapped around him like a living thing, devouring oxygen, smothering thought. He gasped, chest heaving, sweat rolling into the wounds already carved into him. Pain erupted in waves, but he held on, dragging memories from deep recesses. Summers spent working under an unrelenting sun. The blistering sting of asphalt beneath bare feet as a child. The fire that once consumed a barracks, where he'd carried 2 men out despite the burns on his arms. Compared to that, this was nothing more than a cruel imitation. The scribes clicked nervously among themselves. Duration exceeded. Probability of collapse 93%. "Yet he stands," the commander growled. Indeed, though his body sagged against the restraints, Callan's eyes remained open, staring at the creatures with something perilously close to defiance. Each breath was ragged, but each one declared survival. He coughed, tasted iron, then laughed, a dry and broken sound that startled even himself. The aliens froze. Laughter was not in their lexicon of responses to torment. The scientist recoiled as though the sound itself carried contagion. "What does it mean?" one of them asked. The commander did not answer. It only stared at Callan with narrowed eyes, as though trying to translate the meaning of that laugh into its own tongue. When the flames receded, Callan's skin was scorched in places, but his voice rasped out clearly. "I've had hangovers worse than this." The blow came swiftly, a strike from one of the guards that split his cheek open. He tasted fresh blood, but his smirk widened through swollen lips. The commander raised a hand, halting the guard. Violence delivered in anger was useless data, and yet the human's mockery gnawed at them all. Another trial began. This time blades extended from mechanical arms, honed edges glinting under sterile light. They traced across his skin, shallow at first, then deeper, drawing crimson lines that pooled against the restraints. Callan hissed between his teeth, but the scream they expected never came. He thought of frost slicing through gloves on winter patrols, of barbed wire tearing flesh during exercises, of 1,000 tiny cuts life had already granted him. Each scar had been a lesson, and now they were his shield. As the cuts grew longer, his mind retreated to memory again. He remembered the laughter of his unit after a brutal training march, how they'd sung despite blistered feet and soaked uniforms. He remembered his father telling him after a broken arm at 12, that bones heal stronger after the break. Pain had always been a teacher, never a master. When the blades retracted, Callan slumped in his restraints, blood dripping steadily onto the floor. Yet when they expected silence, he forced his head up, eyes glassy but burning. "You can carve me up all you want," he whispered, each word trembling, "but you'll never own me." For the first time, hesitation rippled through the ranks of the HFY. The scientist murmured in unease. He endures beyond reason. If one human can withstand this, what of the others? The commander's reply was flat, yet something under the surface betrayed unease. Then we must find the limit. Every creature has one. Callan closed his eyes, letting the words settle into him like a challenge. They wanted a limit? He almost smiled. Humanity had been chasing limits since it learned to walk upright, and each time it had shattered them. His body trembled violently, exhaustion clawing at him with relentless hands, but he breathed through it, finding rhythm in the agony. He knew he was close to the edge, yet he would not let them see him fall. Not yet. The machines hummed again, brighter, harsher, promising trials still to come. Callan's heartbeat thundered in his ears, but he forced his mind to sharpen. Every torment was a lesson. Every scream denied was a victory. And though his body was failing, his will only sharpened with each test. The commander gave the order for escalation. The scientist prepared another device, one that pulsed with ominous light. Callan lifted his head despite the weight dragging it down, meeting their alien eyes with unbroken defiance. They thought they were studying endurance. What they were truly studying was humanity itself. And before this was finished, they would understand what it meant. The hum of the device filled the chamber, and the air thickened with anticipation. Callan drew in one more breath, steady despite his shaking frame, and whispered just loud enough for them to hear, "Go on. I'm ready." The air vibrated with a low, pulsing resonance, the alien machine's glow swelling until the chamber itself seemed alive with menace. Callan's restraints had been tightened, as though the HFY finally recognized how dangerous defiance could be, even from a half-broken human. The scientist leaned close, its long fingers hovering over the device controls, and its amber eyes studied him not with curiosity anymore but with unease. This was no longer an experiment in their eyes. This was a confrontation. The device discharged. Agony surged through every vein and nerve, a torrent so consuming that his body convulsed against the steel frame. His vision fractured into 1,000 shards, each a flicker of memory or hallucination. His father's hand on his shoulder, fire tearing across a battlefield, snow biting into skin during endless marches. He wanted to let go, to surrender to the void clawing at him, but something deep inside anchored him. The HFY had mistaken tolerance for fragility. They believed pain would erode him. They had no understanding that pain could be a forge. The scientist increased the output. Callan's heartbeat thundered in his ears, faster, louder, until he could no longer separate it from the hum of the machine. Muscles tore beneath the strain, veins bulged, and blood seeped from his nose and ears. He felt himself teetering on the precipice of collapse, but even as the edges of darkness pulled at him, he chose not to fall. Somewhere beyond the haze of torment, he forced his eyes to open and fix on the commander standing behind the controls. The stare was jagged, wild, but it carried something unmistakable: refusal. The commander faltered. For a single beat, its posture shifted, not out of pity but out of recognition. This human would not break. The scientist hissed in protest, demanding permission to continue. The commander gave a single nod. The device intensified once more, a crescendo of suffering meant to annihilate what remained of him. The scream that escaped Callan was not one of defeat but of fury. It ripped through the sterile chamber, raw and guttural, shaking the aliens to their cores. He felt bones strain and muscles tear, yet he embraced it, turned agony into momentum. The restraints groaned under the force of his thrashing, metal bending ever so slightly. The scientists muttered frantically, documenting what should have been impossible. Inside the torrent, Callan's mind sharpened. Pain had stripped him bare, but it had also awakened something primal, an instinct older than language, the stubborn will to endure when endurance meant survival. Every trial, every torment had taught him something about the rhythm of their machines, the way the HFY moved, the moments they assumed compliance. Patterns assembled in his head even as his body writhed. He was dying, perhaps, but he was also learning. The device powered down at last, leaving him slumped, chest heaving, body slick with blood and sweat. The scientist leaned in eagerly, scanning vitals. Unstable. Organ failure imminent. He cannot endure further. Callan's lips trembled, then curved upward into the faintest smile. Still, breathing. The words rattled out broken and thin, but the sound froze the chamber. The commander's eyes narrowed, unsettled not by the statement itself but by the truth of it. For the first time, doubt fractured their certainty. The HFY were a species of order, of calculation. They believed every being had limits measurable by pain and pressure. Yet here was proof of something else, something beyond reason. The scribes whispered in uneasy tones, their notes faltering as if the act of recording itself had become meaningless. They prepared for another round, but Callan's eyes followed every movement. His mind, sharpened by torment, noted the subtle rhythm of the guard rotations, the slight lag in the restraint's locking mechanism, the way the scientist always positioned its fragile thorax too close when adjusting the controls. These were opportunities, fragments of freedom hidden inside the cracks of routine. The commander hesitated before giving the order to continue. Its voice, once clipped with certainty, carried a shade of uncertainty. One more trial. If he survives, we will know the truth of this species. The scientist activated the chamber again, and light flared around him. Agony surged fresh, hotter and deeper than before, searing every inch of nerve. But Callan no longer fought to block it out. He embraced it, let it flood through him until it became fuel. The pain clarified his intent. He was not here simply to endure. He was here to win. His body arched against the restraints, tendons standing out in stark relief. One of the metal cuffs shifted under the immense pressure, a subtle movement the aliens did not notice. Callan did. Through gritted teeth, he forced his muscles to push harder, ignoring the sound of tearing flesh. The cuff bent just enough to weaken. Not yet an escape, but the beginning of one. The aliens were too entranced by the display to notice. They whispered in tones that bordered on fear, trying to reconcile their calculations with the living defiance before them. Callan's breathing was ragged, his vision blurred, but his will crystallized. Every ounce of agony that surged into him became another nail in the coffin of their arrogance. At last the machine powered down once more. Silence filled the chamber, heavy and trembling. Callan sagged in his restraints, barely conscious, blood dripping from his chin. Yet when the scientist leaned in to confirm his state, his eyes opened once more, blazing with that same unyielding fire. "You'll regret this," he whispered, voice so faint it was nearly lost. The commander straightened, its amber gaze locked on him. It wanted to dismiss the words, but something in its chest twisted, an emotion dangerously close to dread. The scientist turned to reset the device, but the commander raised a hand. "No," it said quietly, the word heavy with conflicted meaning. "Enough for now." The chamber lights dimmed, the machines cooling, and Callan let himself drift into the edge of unconsciousness. He had survived another round, and with it he had taken one step closer to the opening he needed. His body was battered, but his mind burned hotter than ever. They thought they were testing his tolerance. What they were truly doing was giving him the tools to strike back. As the guards unfastened the table to shift him to his holding cell, Callan felt the weakened cuff loosen further around his wrist. He masked the flicker of triumph in his eyes with a weary slump, letting them believe he was broken at last. But within, a new certainty took root. The moment was coming. The pain had not destroyed him. It had prepared him. When the doors sealed and the chamber emptied of sound, the human exhaled a slow, deliberate breath. His body screamed in protest, yet his spirit whispered only one promise: he would rise. And when he did, the KLYTH would finally understand the cost of underestimating humanity. The restraints clicked open as the guards dragged Callan back toward his cell. His body hung between them like a rag of torn muscle and broken bone, but his mind sharpened with every faltering step. The weakened cuff he had loosened during the last trial clinked faintly against his wrist, a promise hidden in plain sight. He stumbled deliberately, forcing the guards to shift their grip, and felt the metal give a little more. The seed of escape had sprouted, and he guarded it behind a mask of exhaustion. The corridor hummed with the steady rhythm of the ship's engines. Each flicker of light across the alien alloy walls revealed reflections of his blood smeared along the guards' hands. They thought him beaten, a test subject whose only value was endurance. But Callan knew they had made their gravest mistake. They had given him time to learn them, their routines, their arrogance, their vulnerabilities. Pain had not blinded him. It had taught him. When the guards shoved him into the cell and sealed the barrier, Callan collapsed onto the cold floor. His body screamed in revolt, trembling with aftershocks of torment. He lay still, eyes half-lidded, while every nerve burned with protest. But beneath that storm, his will tightened into steel. He had endured more than they believed possible, and now the moment to turn that endurance into action had come. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes. Time was fractured by pain and shallow breaths. But when he heard the low whine of the energy barrier powering down for routine inspection, his heart steadied. The guards entered with casual disdain, expecting compliance from a man on the edge of death. Callan's arms snapped upward, the loose cuff clanging free, and in a single brutal motion he wrapped it around the nearest alien's throat. The HFY thrashed, claws scraping at his arms, but Callan twisted with the ferocity of desperation. Bones cracked beneath his grip. The second guard lunged, weapon raised, but Callan surged forward, ignoring the tearing pain in his side. He wrenched the weapon free, a curved blade humming with alien charge, and drove it into the guard's abdomen. The creature convulsed, then fell silent. Callan collapsed beside them, chest heaving, blood dripping into his eyes. He was dying, there was no denying it, but he was free and freedom burned brighter than agony. He staggered into the corridor, blade clutched tight, body swaying. Every step was a negotiation with pain, but each movement brought him closer to purpose. Sirens blared as the system registered fallen guards, red light flooding the hallways. The ship stirred in alarm. Callan pressed his back to the wall, sliding along shadows, his instincts honed by years of training and hardened by suffering. He knew he would not escape unscathed, perhaps not at all, but escape was no longer the sole objective. He intended to leave a mark they could never erase. More guards intercepted him, their weapons raised with precision. Callan charged, raw and unrelenting, blade flashing in arcs that carved through alien flesh. His body faltered under each blow he took in return, but he advanced regardless, forcing them back through sheer refusal to fall. He became the embodiment of every lesson his torment had carved into him. Pain did not stop him, it propelled him. The scientist who had overseen his trials appeared at the end of the corridor, hands trembling as it raised a device meant to subdue. "Stop!" it cried, its tones overlapping in frantic distortion. "You cannot endure further." Callan's laugh was hoarse, nearly broken, but it rang louder than any scream. "You still don't get it?" he rasped, staggering closer. "I don't endure in spite of pain. I endure because of it." The device discharged, a lance of energy searing across his chest. His body buckled, but he did not stop. One step. Another. The scientist retreated in horror, fumbling with its controls, but Callan was already upon it. The blade rose and fell, swift and final, silencing the creature's protest. The commander's voice thundered through the ship, summoning reinforcements. Callan stumbled toward the command deck, leaving a trail of blood behind him. Each step was heavier than the last, but his spirit blazed hotter with every beat of his failing heart. The corridor opened into the control chamber, where the commander stood tall, amber eyes gleaming with cold fury. "You should not exist," it growled, weapon crackling in its claws. Callan tightened his grip on the stolen blade, swaying but unbowed. "Get used to disappointment." The commander struck, a bolt of energy ripping past Callan's shoulder. He lunged forward, ignoring the seared flesh, and closed the distance in a burst of savage momentum. They clashed, alien strength against human tenacity, every strike echoing like thunder in the chamber. Callan's body tore with each movement, but he kept pressing, fueled not by survival alone but by the need to prove them wrong. The commander snarled, slamming him into a console, claws sinking deep into his side. Callan roared in answer, driving the blade upward into the alien's chest. The two locked together in a grim embrace, blood, human and HFY alike, spilling across the deck. With a final push, Callan twisted the blade and the commander's amber eyes dimmed. The alien collapsed, dragging him down with it. Alarms screamed across the ship as systems faltered. Callan, bleeding and broken, pulled himself upright against the console. His hand found the controls and with a final act of will, he triggered the distress beacon, the same one he had seen activated during his tortures. But this time it carried his message. A warning. A declaration. His voice, cracked but steady, filled the ship's broadcast channels. To whoever's listening, they wanted to know how much pain a human can take. Now they know. And they'll never forget. He slumped against the console, vision dimming, but his lips curled into one last defiant smile. The beacon pulsed into the void, carrying his words beyond the stars. When the ship's systems finally fell silent, Callan's body lay still. But the legend of what he had endured and what he had unleashed had already begun its journey. The HFY would never again look at humans as fragile. They would remember the one who rose through agony, who turned torment into victory. And across the stars, others would hear the warning carried in his final breath, that humanity's true weapon was not strength, nor speed, nor technology. It was the will to suffer, to survive, and to fight until the very last heartbeat. Pain had been their weapon. But in the end, it had become his triumph.